Around the turn of the century, about one-third of Americans lived on farms. They worked the land like their ancestors before them. Many small farms only grew enough food to support a family or a community. Families worked long days, and no one in the family was exempt.
I lived in Arkansas. I was about 8 years of age. Yeah. So I started to working in the field about 8. And about 10 years of age, I was really working in the field, plowing at that time. Yeah, so we all had a job. We all had a job. Everybody hooked on the farm. And you know, my mother, she in time to come to chop the cotton, she would put the dear old old cook stove, old wood cook stove. She'd put those beans, some of that old hog meat, cabbage on the stove, beans. She'd come out in the field work till about 11:30. And she'd go home and fix a meal. And we'd all come in at that time at 12 o'clock and eat. And 1 o'clock, we had to go back to the field and work, sun up to sundown.
They needed every hour of daylight and then some.
Mostly when we had the dairy, you'd get up about 3:30 in the morning, go get the cows, bring them in. We had 65 head, and you milked them out in the weather. You didn't, whether it rained or anything, no shelter for them.
But these small family farms were beginning to fade from the American landscape. The roar of the Industrial Revolution had reached the farms. Machinery was steadily replacing manpower, and the railroad enabled farmers to transport their goods to nearby cities and distant countries. With an eye on growing more and selling more, big farms began to buy up little farms. Progress was transforming what had been a way of life for generations into a business. This progress came with a price. Modern improvements allowed more goods to be produced, which caused prices to fall, and falling prices meant problems for farmers, big and small. But another crisis postponed the looming problem: World War I.
When World War I breaks out in Europe, a number of European farmers go off to be soldiers, and so there's a demand for agricultural products from the United States. That increases when we get involved in the war in 1917.
Throughout the First World War, American farmers borrowed money to acquire more land and more machinery to farm that land. Tractors enabled wealthy landowners to farm more land with fewer farm hands. With profits soaring, landowners were in their heyday. But they had overlooked one very important fact. Sooner or later, the war would end, and when it did, American exports would be far less valuable.
After the war, what happens is soldiers go back to farming, and so the market for American agricultural products plummets, and the prices for agricultural goods fall by 50% within a year and a half or two. That is twice as much as the decline in other prices.
This sudden nosedive in prices had dire consequences. Farmers could not make enough money to pay their bank loans. Even prosperous farms began to struggle. Many families feared that they would lose their farms altogether. And with good reason. When farmers defaulted on their loans, the banks were quick to seize their property. And with the onset of the Great Depression in 1929, things only grew worse.
Farmers have a tough life anyway. If you think about gambling, they're the ultimate gamblers. I mean, they've got to gamble on rain, weather conditions. They've got to borrow money to buy seed in the spring and hope they get a good harvest and the price holds up for the fall. And so it continued to get worse in the 1930s.
As Americans struggled with poverty, they were unable to afford fresh farm goods, causing prices to drop further. With prices dropping, sales slowing, and farms failing, the agricultural problem grew into a national crisis. And for farmers in the Plains states, things were only going to go from bad to worse.